For over 2 years now, I have been on the campaign to expose this so-called preacher that calls himself a bishop, as well as some of his minions that calls themselves his disciples. Some of them works as pastors under him, and he has sent them out to form their own churches, to franchise his sect. He is a wolf in sheep clothing that preys on vulnerable women and gullible men that choose to follow him. He has done so many evil things to people, and I only have time to share a fraction of it today. Me and my mother unknowingly joined a small Christian sect. Maybe I shouldn't call them a sect. They are too small to be called a sect. They are more like a cult. I was 16 at the time, and my father just passed away. Being the only son of a stay-at-home mom, I dropped out of boarding school, and we moved back to my hometown in the east of my country to live with my mother's brother, because we couldn't afford the rent of our apartment in the big city. When me and my mother moved back to my hometown, I enrolled at a local government school which is free. The condition of the schools are poor. The teachers barely shows up to classes. Most students are from equally underprivileged background and resorted to criminal activities like gang-related stuff, stealing and costermonger, which is normally street vendors, because those were the options they had. I was a good kid, thanks to my late dad for working hard to make sure that I went to a good school when he was still alive, so I had a good foundation. Instead of joining my friends to do bad things, I became a street vendor along with my mom. I tried to help her as much as I could when I come back from school early, so we can make enough money and save so we can move out of my uncle's house and get a place of our own. One Sunday, my uncle took us to his church. We have always been Catholics, but this church was more of a Pentecostal church with a certain cultish flavor, with a leader that thinks he's Jesus. His followers think he's the second coming of Christ. They truly believe that he's the second coming of Christ, and they believe that in order to go to heaven, you have to attend this church. His message is tailored to attract the poor and destitute. He is also a wealthy man and is not afraid to show it. By the type of cars he drives, the mansion he lives in, he's a very shrewd businessman, and most of his money is interwoven with the congregation. I will explain that later. His wealth further solidified to his followers that he is the chosen one. He is very intelligent and a master manipulator. When he speaks from the pulpit, it was almost like his message were tailor-made for each member of his congregation, if that makes sense. I was still a young man, and I was captivated by him, and so was my mom. My uncle and his family have been attending the church for a few years now before we joined, and he wouldn't stop going on about how great the man is, and who could argue against him. The first time me and my mom met the bishop, he offered to give us a small amount of money to start a business based on a specific arrangement where he owns the business and she works for him, and my mom pays him in percentages every week. Sounds good, right? Well, this business belongs to him, and he could take it anytime we misbehave. I mean, I'm not going to lie, that really changed our life overnight. So there it was, he replicated such business practice among his congregation, mostly underprivileged, and they were paying him dividends every week. Now imagine replicating such brilliance among a congregation of 3,000 to 5,000 loyalists. He also has 13 pastors under him. They are known as his disciples. He trained them, and they assist him in consulting the members, providing them with financial advice. He also has a group of young men that act as his soldiers, his enforcers, to make sure that everybody is in line. He took a liking to me of subsequent meeting with him that I attended with my mom. On one of those meetings, my mom came to see him. We had to wait in line for about 3 hours before it was our turn. I waited in another room while he met my mom privately. After their meeting, when he walked out of the door with my mom, he started asking me so many questions. He thought I was smart and invited me to come back another day to be one of his personal assistants that cleans up his office and record names of guests that come to see him. My mother thanked him for giving me that opportunity. In less than 3 months of attending that church, we were able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment and some disposable income. And we had nothing but gratitude for the bishop. The first day I worked for him during his counseling session, I noticed that most of the people there to see him were women, and most of the women were married. Even that very first day of the job, I suspected that he was intimate with at least 3 of the women. And come to find out, my suspicions were true. I was old enough to know what it sounds like when 2 people were being intimate. My office is in between his office and the waiting area, so the people on the other side wouldn't hear a thing. The noise were so faint that I could barely hear them, so I wouldn't expect anybody that wasn't in the same room as me to be able to hear it. I knew one of those women. I have seen her several times with her husband. She had 2 daughters. One of them I had a crush on. At that age, my sense of morality tells me that there was something wrong with what the bishop is doing. But somehow, because it was him, it must be the right thing. How could a man that righteous be wrong? How could a man that charismatic be wrong? Maybe that's what God told him to do. I used to tell myself all this, and I'm certain all these women he was having his way with thought the same. And that was just a tip of the iceberg. For example, one Wednesday, I came back from school early to attend service because I was scheduled to be one of the ushers that day. After he finished preaching, he sat at his so-called throne on the altar and waved me to come over. When I came over to the altar next to his seat, he whispered in my ear to quietly approach a girl sitting in a particular location among his congregation and pass her a note. This girl was only 3 years younger than me. I knew her age because her brother goes to the same school as me. After the service that evening, when everyone had left, I was closing things up, me and some of my church members. I saw the girl going into his office. I could only imagine what they were doing. Looking back to my mindset back then, I thought she was lucky that he made time for her, and I'm sad to say that she became one of his regulars. I could go on and on about similar incidents. After graduating high school, my mom had enough money to send me off to college. About 2 semesters later, when I came back from college during the holidays, it was clear to me that my mom was also having an affair with the bishop. My time away to college has broken the spell that the bishop had on me, because I could see things very clearly. He was having an affair with a lot of his female parishioners. Some of them were married. The strange part is that some of their husbands might have known, but still kept silent. That just showed how influential he is in their lives. They saw him as their Messiah, in charge of their faith and financial well-being. Most of the church members that work for him make enough money to get by, but not enough to become wealthy. He kept them on a tight leash, so when they fall out of line, he sends one of his boys to manhandle them. Around here, the police are a joke. They can easily be bribed by powerful men, and you could get them to arrest people if you have enough money. During that summer break, I thought he was leading us astray, but I struggle with that internally because without him, I'll be living on the street and eating breadcrumbs. Without him, my mom wouldn't be able to afford her place. She's barely getting by, but she's getting by. And in as much as my conscience bothers me, he is still the golden goose and a father figure to me. During that summer holiday, I was serving as an usher in the church that evening. And as ushers, we also serve as security. As the service was going on, I noticed a man with a machete heading towards the entrance of the church. He looked really angry. When he entered the church, he broke the celestial ambience of the church by yelling profanity at the bishop who was sitting down at the pulpit. He was accusing the bishop of stealing his wife and daughters. It was extremely embarrassing. We had about 7 men serving as ushers and security, including me, and we managed to capture the man before he makes his way few feet into the church. Not without a struggle and some non-life-threatening injuries suffered by some of my security colleagues. We dragged him to the side of the building, then proceeded to beat the living hell out of him. Although I wasn't involved in the beating, I stood back and I did nothing to stop it. I didn't know why. but I pulled out my phone and started recording the beating. At that time, my adrenaline was boiling, so I didn't have time to understand why he was doing what he was doing, or if what he was saying was true. Why was he calling the bishop a false prophet? Why was he saying that he stole his wife and his daughters? To me at the time, we saw him as a demonic possessed man who just knifed one of our church members and insulted our bishop. The security were almost trying to kill him. Somehow, the police arrived. Then the man was taken into custody and was sent to the police station after he has received significant beating from the ushers and the security. When the police took him away, I felt really sorry for him because he was badly beaten. The worst part of it is I knew that man. He drives a red Lexus with his wife. He had 3 daughters and 2 sons. Up until recently, he was doing really well. They always looked happy, and everyone envied them. What in God's earth have driven him to this madness? He was always smiling. He was always quick to evangelize about how great the bishop was. That night, I couldn't go to sleep. I told my mom what happened, and she totally dismissed the man as a sinner and a lunatic that was possessed with lust, and have forgotten who made him to where he is. I was stunned by the lack of compassion and how far from reality my mom has become, and her ability to justify every allegation that I brought against him. I couldn't help but look introspectively how far off we are from reality. I began to inquire about the story of the man the following day. When I started asking questions, I would later find out that some small group of members are not entirely on board with all what the bishop was doing, but they remained silent. I heard about how members were forced to pay high percentages of their income to push them. Some husbands would even go as far as offering their wives and daughters to some of his disciples or security guards to make up for things. One of the most disturbing part of it is, and something I wouldn't understand, is most of the women are happy to get along with it. They are so willing to share this man among his disciples and security. It's like a criminal organization. From my conversation with my mom, I understand that my mom didn't think they were doing anything wrong, and they're willing to share him and his disciples, even with their daughters. Maybe somebody more knowledgeable about psychology of human beings could explain that to me. That brings me back to the story of the man that was badly beaten and lost his wife and 3 daughters. So the story goes that the bishop told the man to give him his wife. I am not sure what the man did or if it was some sort of punishment. Not only did he marry the man's wife, but the wife also went along with him, and she disowned her husband for going against it. And get this, not only did the bishop marry the mother, he married the man's 3 daughters as well. The mother and daughters wouldn't even speak to their father anymore. Of course, I'm leaving out a lot more details from this story, but I'm trying to pass this story across without making this a 1,000-page writing. The man got so frustrated that he went insane, and who could blame him? So after the mother abandoned her husband and her sons and took her daughter to marry the bishop, she now lives with the bishop and his other wives, along with his daughters. Now, the problem all started when the man in custody of the police passed away. I'm not sure whether he received any medical attention after the beating they gave him, or if he received additional beating at the police station. I am not sure whether it was from the beating or whether the police gave him more beating of their own. It really made me sick. I became disenchanted with the whole thing. I felt bad for the poor man because I felt like nobody could tell his story. Nobody would give him a voice. Nobody would speak for him. I took it upon myself to do it for him, knowing that I would jeopardize my family's livelihood, my safety, and the safety of my mother and my extended family members. I took the initiative to write a story about the man on social media and posted the video of how he was beaten and taken to the station. And it went viral, and people started talking. I founded a group along with some other people, and we started protesting in front of the church every service, much to my mother's dismay. She was told to disown me, which she refused, and her business was taken away from her. My mother hated me for it, but I continued to protest, We started with just 25 of us and we grew to 200 within a month as we continued our campaign to expose the bishop and his disciples and henchmen. Some members started defecting, and the publicity started putting pressure on the police to investigate. Polygamy is legal in my country, but murder is not. Our campaign started garnering more publicity, and the federal government started paying attention and started investigating the local police. They had no choice but to shut the church down. The bishop, his henchmen, and his disciples were so occupied defending themselves and their very existence that they left my mother and her business alone. Although I was part of the group that started the protest, a lot more of the church members came out and started exposing him. More passionate people took over it, and I became a bystander. The last time I heard, the church was shut down, but my friend told me that they started back again and went underground, and they relocated, and some of the disciples went to start their own franchise, and they spread themselves out so they couldn't be easily shut down. Well, in this country, it's easy to get away with something like that, and evil is still allowed to endure. Beware of false prophets. I verified that this story took place somewhere in West Africa, in a place in southeast Nigeria. But it could very well happen anywhere around the world. You don't need to travel around the world to notice that the poorer the country, the more religious it is. There is a strong relationship between a country's socio-economic status and the religiosity of its residents. Even in Western countries, it is so easy for people to fall into groupthink. When a person is underprivileged or poorly educated, like Trump would say, it is easy for a charismatic figure to influence them. In the United States, why is the most underprivileged communities more religious? Maybe it's because they think they have tried everything. So when they find a group or a charismatic leader that claim to have all the answer and can allow them to stop thinking, they stop asking questions and do whatever the leaders say. Some of us are old enough to remember Jamestown in 1978 and even Heaven Gates in 1997. And there are lots of others similar to that. On an anthropological level, humans have been wired to be influenced by religion and or charismatic figures, because during our evolution, we feel safer in a group with a strong leader. During a time of war or conflict, we are more successful when we join a group and believe in a leader that motivates us and gets us out of chaos. So even now, when we feel vulnerable and have tried everything and nothing worked, our brain resorts back to that caveman time, and we look for groups with charismatic leaders, and we form personality cults around that person, and the person says the right things, tells us what to do, the person is successful. We just become lazy and allow them to influence the decision we make. The reason why the United States is the greatest country, economical, technological, and military-wise, is because of the free thinking. Every once in a while, you need some motivation, you need to listen to some motivational speech. But don't become too lazy and allow yourself to be controlled by groupthink and personality cults. Because when they think for you, they can control you. And most of these charismatic leaders are selfish and they are predators. Please let me know what you think about this story. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Checking out.